are Terrence to my right from Malaysia and Jeff to my left from Taiwan. So you're going to hear the sound when it's 1 minute and 6 and 7, so just watch out for it. Without further ado, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to begin the debate. Here.
Mr. Speaker, on the motion, this House would abolish all systems that attempt to rank universities. As side opening government, on the very outset, what it is we're okay with is universities being able to put up and advertise why their college necessarily is good or why their college is the one that students need to attend. What we're against or what we intend to abolish are independent bodies that seek to rank universities according to whatever metrics it is that they choose to, Mr. Speaker. What we're going to be doing from side opening government, Mr. Speaker, is essentially tell you what are the harms that have come about from ranking universities thus far, what we think or what our definition of what learning has to be in the current scenario, and we're also going to talk to you about how we don't think metrics that are set out by these bodies are necessarily measurable or are necessarily the ones that need to be taken into consideration, and we're also going to talk to you about the benefits that come about from our move. But talking first about our definition of what learning needs to be, Mr. Speaker. We think learning should be a lot more, or should be, it does also encompasses the idea of molding personalities, and also encompasses the idea of letting students decide for themselves what university it is that they intend, what university it is that is best cut out for themselves, Mr. Speaker. We don't think an independent body is in a position to have to make this decision for themselves, because we think every student has different necessities, Mr. Speaker. We think every student has different needs, and we think different universities are better placed in a position to have to cater to these needs individually, Mr. Speaker. What we think is happening in status quo is when you have a certain body or independent body that seeks to rank these universities according to, say, metric A, B, C, we think this necessarily coerces students to believe that these universities A, B, C are the ones that are best for them. Whereas we think the metrics that are set out are not necessarily standard and which we're going to talk about later, Mr. Speaker. We're going to come to that later, right? The idea that the metrics that are set out are not necessarily standard, the idea that what you might be seeking from a university might be available at a place a lot closer to home, might be available at a place that you intend to go for, that might be more convenient for you, that might be more in your sphere of affordability, Mr. Speaker. We think learning, not taken my sake. We think learning should also be about molding personalities. We think that as an aspect has been underplayed very vastly in today's scenario, Mr. Speaker. We think a lot of importance has been placed on seeking jobs, or the amount that each of these jobs that you seek are going to pay you, Mr. Speaker, on the amount of people that get placed from a certain university, or they seek to draw them in with the kind of faculty that they have, or with the kind of provisions that they have, Mr. Speaker. But let's now talk about the idea of what the mindset of the student is, Mr. Speaker. We think when you have an independent body that seeks to rank universities, you have set universities A, B, C that are ranked 1, and you have that are the first preference of the majority of the population or a majority of the students who go out into university or who go out to study, Mr. Speaker. We think what necessarily happens is twofold, right? First, the idea that all the academically inclined students necessarily feel that they've done the best that they can in terms of getting into these universities, and that their future is set, or that they most definitely will get placed at the end of the year by attending these universities. On the other hand, you also have the not so academically inclined students feeling dejected about the fact that they didn't get into the university of their choice, or that they didn't get into a university that might have that is popularly known or is ranked first, Mr. Speaker. We think this idea of universities being ranked first, or this idea of you not being someone who comes from, say, Harvard or Stanford, and you being from a university that you necessarily think you're filtered down, Mr. Speaker, because you weren't able to get into that, doesn't necessarily set the right kind of attitude in terms of beginning your year at a college with you feeling dejected about the fact that you didn't get into the university that you sought to get into, and you didn't get into the university that is popularly, not taken maps in, that is popularly known to be the best, or popularly known to be the worst, Mr. Speaker. We think the mindset of the students needs to be more open in terms of choosing universities that are more tailor-made, or that provide courses that are more suitable for you, Mr. Speaker. We don't think this reduces competition in any way, or we think this inevitably leads to universities improving on their own methods or on their own fields of expertise and selling that out to students, as opposed to having to meet metrics that are set out by these bodies or by these independent bodies. Before I get on to my next point, yes.
But without ranking, people will still get rejected if the universities, decide to only accept 100 students out of 1,000.
Yes, people will still get rejected, Madam Speaker, but there is no popular notion of that university that rejected them being the best university around. Right? The idea is the university that you now go to isn't necessarily the best one around. It's all right to have to be in this university because it isn't ranked 100 on a list of top 100 top universities. As opposed, we think there's a less of a comparison between universities, and it becomes more about getting into the university that is best made for you or that is most affordable. Do you think the amount of dejection that you face reduces significantly the minute there is less of a comparison, the minute there is less of a comparison between universities in terms of which one's the best and which one's the worst, Mr. Speaker? But let's now talk to you about the idea of how most of the metrics that are set out by these this thing are not measurable. If you look at a liberal arts college or a science college, we think the metrics that go about with our definition of learning are necessarily, for example, in a liberal arts, in a music school, for example, if you would be considered a good school or you would be considered a good university if the students that pass out of your university are able to compose music on their own or able to compose beautiful music on their own. Whereas we don't think that is necessarily measurable, because what is measured at the end of the day is the number of albums that you sell or how popular or how commercial it is that you become. Even if you're talking about a science stream or an engineering college, we think the metrics that are set are the kind of jobs that you get, the amount that you're paid after you pass out of the jobs, as opposed to the idea of inculcating a spirit of research. The thing is, we don't know the number of researchers that are out there, and we don't know the number of scientists that are out there, simply because this isn't a field or this isn't a metric that's used to determine the kind of students or the ranking of a certain university, Mr. Speaker. We don't count the number of patents that have been issued from the number of students that pass out of this. We count the number of jobs that have been taken, or the amount that these jobs spend, Mr. Speaker, which leads us to believe that we think that there is just more innovation coming about in terms of universities being able to come up with methods of their own accord that need to appeal or that need to inculcate certain values in children without a certain foreign body imposing values that need to be met or imposing metrics that need to be met. For all these reasons, we're extremely proud to propose.
Thank you. Leader of Opposition, please.
Mr. Speaker, the opening government argued as if the ranking system that we have in the status quo is very unilateral. However, we really reject this notion from the very beginning. There are a lot of diverse indexes in which the private institutions implement to evaluate these universities. Not only how much academic achievement you make, but also about globalization, also about amenities, IT technologies, or maybe even the student-professor ratio or whatnot. We say that given the fact that there are numerous and diverse indexes, separate or either balanced, combined in one ranking to evaluate these universities, that kind of problem set by the OG, which was that the universities would now become a very unilateral institution which neglects care that the people want from their home or whatnot. We say that still those kind of benefits could be reflected in our current ranking system. Now, first of all, they say that students have to decide what they want to do and which university they want to go to. What we would like to say is that what we're doing on the OO quo is we're providing students to make a more informed choice by giving them more information when they make the calculus whether that university best suits my interest. For example, if I'm a person who's willing to become a diplomat, then I'll be looking for a school who has a lot of globalized systems or whatnot. Then I can refer to the ranking in that particular index and make my decision and make more accurate decision in order to realize my expected expectations, right? No, thank you. Also, we would like to therefore conclude that those kind of diverse indexes can actually help these students choose what they really want to and refer mainly the indexes that they want to refer to, right? They also talk about like students who want to receive the care that they receive from the home or convenience, but still we say that these kind of matters are still reflected in the indexes. For example, if the ratio of student to professor is very low, then it means that you have more possibility to get more care from that university. And that kind of atmosphere could also be considered in the ranking. Therefore, their problem is not really relevant to the motion, the policy. Also, they talked about how the people would feel the sense of rejectment when they do not get into like Harvard University, because Harvard University is the first ranked university in this system. However, firstly, we would like to question like how would this policy actually change the popular notion that is pre-existing in the status quo. We say that the notion that Harvard University or like Oxford, those universities are the first like very good universities, is a very fixated notion that have been formed throughout tradition. Like Oxford has been the best university in England for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? So we say that just because you remove the ranking doesn't really mean that people would not really people would not feel rejected when they do not get accepted to really prestigious universities. Therefore, it's a problem-solution mismatch, your problem not really being solved, and still the popular notion towards prestigious universities would remain in the status quo. And also we would like to say that still, if there are still students who really have their own field, like for example music or dance, then still they can have pride into their own schools if their school have higher ranking in music or dancing field than Harvard. So we say that this, because the current index system has a lot of diverse areas, that problem can be solved. Yes.
Now, how would you be able to know that, meanwhile, you were only looking at ranking as a reference?
Oh, we're not saying that we're gonna only let the students decide by only this ranking. We're saying that when we have this ranking as a plus factor when we make a decision, it's more likely we're going to make a more accurate decision, because now at least we know which university is famous for globalization if I want to go there, which university has best amenities if I really care about having fancy desks or like computers or whatnot. Now, moving on to my arguments, I'm going to firstly talk about how the ranking system motivates the universities to improve, and therefore enhancing the academia as a whole. We have diverse levels of analysis, but first of all, let me talk about the characteristic of ranking itself. We say that ranking most accurately and most objectively shows the current situation, current position of the universities within diverse ranking. It's because the ranking system in the status quo is currently done by one institution who scrutinizes many different universities according to united standards in many different areas. So we say that whereas the social perception is very inaccurate and cannot be really balanced, the current existing ranking system done by institution is very accurate in telling you the current position. Then, how does it really improve and motivates the universities? In 3 levels. On the first level, once you know where you are, then you can actually diagnose the current situation of yourselves, and the universities can find out the problems where your weak points are, and maybe set the direction or solutions to improve that point. For example, if a university got a really significantly lower ranking in, for example, IT index, then maybe that university can find out their weak points and at least know where to improve on. And on the second level, we say that the ranking system that is announced annually or periodically can enable you to check how much you have improved, after putting the efforts. For example, if a university put really a lot of money into improving the globalization index by having a lot of exchange programs and whatnot, then the university can check the escalation of ranking, like how much ranking have I improved. If that university only improved 1 ranking, then it means that the policy was not really effective. But if there was a significant escalation in the ranking, then it means that the solutions are effective and going doing well, and that they can further check to improve themselves. On the third level, we say that the ranking system itself fundamentally involves the sense of competition, so that you have the rival, and because you want to get higher than the ranking, because it involves the sense of competition, it actually motivates more not to be embarrassed by having a lower ranking, but actually escalating within that competitive system. Now, on the second argument, I'm going to talk about how ranking system could enable efficient allocation of resources in the perspective of the government. When the government gives subsidy or investment to the universities, in order to make a better investment, we say that the government has to have the information to how much resource and what kind of resource it would allocate to the universities. For example, if there's a university who had a really, really high ranking in the science R&D index, then the government might send the best researchers and maybe do some government projects with that university. And also in the universities that are maybe failing out, that are getting comparatively lesser ranking, then the governments now know which university to focus on to help and advise them to even become better and maybe give some subsidy as a whole. So we say that because in the perspective of governments, students, and also the universities, because the ranking system can provide them better information to improve themselves, we are so proud to oppose.
Okay, thanks. DPM, please.
Mr. Speaker, the side opposition today lives in an ideal world where they believe that the number of indexes that exist out in the world all are taken into an account the minute an organization decides that it's going to provide a metric for the best college out there. And moreover, Mr. Speaker, even if they consider, say, N factors, such as, say, globalization or IT, apart from the fact that they do miss out on a lot more factors out there which can never be objectively defined, even within those N metrics that they do choose to allocate within their ranking, Mr. Speaker, we tell you that the value given to each metric varies within the ranking in itself, in which, Mr. Speaker, the amount of jobs that, say, a Harvard student gets is given much more value than the amount of globalization that occurs in Harvard, or, say, the amount of ID that occurs in Harvard, Mr. Speaker, right? So here is why we tell you, Mr. Speaker, that even if side opposition believes numerous indices exist in ranking, we tell you, firstly, you don't have all the indexes out there which could have possibly made a difference in students' choice of college, and secondly, those indexes are not adequately represented within these rankings in themselves, right? So what has our case entirely been about today, Mr. Speaker? We tell you, Mr. Speaker, that when you consider a certain number of metrics to decide the rank of a university, we tell you it's not fair to the students and it's not fair to the university that an independent body decides that this is the amount of value we should give to jobs coming out from a university, this is the amount of value we should give to globalization coming out, and based on this objective value, we must decide that this college is number 1 and this college is number 2, Mr. Speaker. Why is this not fair? Simply because even if you do consider these metrics, the idea is you're inculcating the idea into society that at the end of the day, after taking so many metrics into account, this is the best university out there, which necessarily goes on to put a shadow on the number of metrics that you took into account in the first place, Mr. Speaker. We tell you the whole idea that the independent body, at the end of the day, even after considering a few metrics, tells you or announces that there is a number 1 university, in itself shadows the very possibility of a person deciding to go and scroll down to check the globalization indexes, Mr. Speaker. We tell you the simple fact that you decided a university is number 1 simply shadows all other indexes out there, right? So let's come to the rebuttals that we had today in terms of the whole idea of information dissemination, right? Where they told us, and the whole idea of changing the notion of universities, where they told that, look, these indexes go on and disseminate information, and secondly, the idea that simply because the notion exists in society till now, there is no way you can possibly change it, right? Firstly, addressing the idea of changing notions of these universities, Mr. Speaker. Here's how we're going to do it, right? We understand it's not an easy process to deconstruct the idea that Oxford is the number 1 university in England, but we do understand, or we do concede that it could be a gradual but a definite process which might take place in the slow future. How is that going to happen? Simply by this mechanism, right? We tell you the minute there is no international body that tells that Oxford is number 1 in UK, or tells that Oxford is number 1 in, say, political science, We tell you Oxford universities looks for other aspects to advertise its programs, right? We tell you Oxford simply can't put number one according to Times Group on its brochure and has to look for other aspects to highlight within its educational brochures or within its advertisements, Mr. Speaker. Here is where we tell you comes about the alternative model that the government has been trying to propose from the first speech, right? We tell you this is how notions change, right? This is how information dissemination becomes better in our model. We tell you that the minute a college doesn't get to say that I am number one or doesn't get to say that I am number two, the college necessarily goes out and looks out for other unique selling points that it can show the students that this is where I'm good at, this is why you should pick me, right? Here is where we tell you, Mr. Speaker, what happens when a college decides that it will have a unique selling point. Necessarily, students do realize that all colleges are not the same, right? And all colleges aren't necessarily the best and the worst. They realize that this college is good in terms of the fact that it has more diversity, or this college is good in terms of it has these research labs in which this research is happening, right? We tell you that under the circumstance of a ranking list, no college will ever go out and try to promote its research labs in a very unique way simply because they didn't have to, right? Simply because rankings were simply enough to show that, look, we're a decent enough college. We tell you the minute you take away the complacency that a rank gives you, Mr. Speaker, the university in itself comes about with innovative ways to go on and show you how their research labs or how necessarily the diversity they have in their college is the unique selling point which they want the students who want to enroll in their college have to focus upon, right? Now, what does this lead to? What is the whole idea of trying to generate colleges having unique selling points lead to, Mr. Speaker? We tell you it simply leads to this, right? It simply leads to the fact that colleges now don't go on to focus on trying to improve those spheres in their colleges which try to make their ranking better, Mr. Speaker, right? Because this is the trend that we've seen over the last few years. We tell you that considering that most of the students and parents decide that since Harvard gets more jobs, we will sell our child to Harvard, what Harvard does is it tries to go on and introduce more job-intensive courses, right? In terms of things that could necessarily help you in your job, but doesn't necessarily help you in innovation or help you in research within your field. Well, for example, Mr. Speaker, in terms of computer science, right, they would necessarily try to have entrepreneurship in terms of IT as a much more important course than, say, an advanced algorithms class, simply because they think this would be more helpful for you in your job and this wouldn't, Mr. Speaker, right? We think these universities necessarily put more importance on job-intensive courses simply because they want to reach on a higher rank, Mr. Speaker. Something that's simply not fair to these students who chose this field simply because they were interested in. Go.
Okay, why can't that happen with university rankings?
Because the idea is this, right? The minute the college has the complacency of knowing that look, I am number one, they simply don't try to have a unique selling point for themselves. They simply want to be just like everyone else, but better, Mr. Speaker. So this is what we're trying to change, right? We don't want all colleges to be just like everyone else, but just slightly better at XYZ scenario. We want each college to be better at this one individual thing, for example, research, or for example, innovation. So here is how we tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the minute you have different unique colleges, and the minute they can't go on and base their entire credibility on this ranking is where necessarily this uniqueness strikes out, right? So here is where it also leads on to the kind of professions that seep on in society, something that Sanjana spoke to you about, right? Some in terms of liberal arts, etc., right? We tell you this, right? The minute the metrics for deciding the rankings for university out there is not the amount of money it generates. We tell you that this simply goes on to generate more profession, or generate more of an interest in professions such as music or professions such as dance, simply because the metric for deciding ranking in colleges is not money anymore, which simply goes on to put more focus on innovation research. Therefore, for all the reasons that we have, simply to generate unique colleges that will necessarily propagate research, necessarily propagate innovation, we tell you, Mr. Speaker, we're extremely proud to propose.
Thank you, DLO, please.
universities are the place where it provides educational services, and that's why we pay tuition fee and whatnot. So because we actually pay for these kind of educational services, we need to have a good calculus. We need to have good information, whether that university is going to be a good university for me to enter, and the consequences will be good for me or not. And when it comes to the ranking system that we see in the status quo, they actually provide the plausibility, they actually provide the informative choices of the individuals better compared to the side when there is no rankings at all. So let's see. So we tell you from the first speaker that it will increase the competition within the universities, because we are not only talking about Harvard or Oxford, but we are also talking about middle ranked universities who has the potential to climb up that ranking, and we are also talking about the rankings who are placed very low at the bottom, which have a less incentive to government to actually fund these kind of public universities or whatnot. There are diverse stakeholders that opening government has mischaracterized under the status quo. So let's engage by rebuttal. Firstly, they ask you, ranking cannot be a good standard of judging because it leaves a lot of factors before judgment. However, in your model, when there is no ranking, people are going to still judge according to the tuition fee, according to distance, according to the number of professor or whatnot. So certain criteria of the yardstick will still exist under your paradigm, and we don't think that factor will actually say that factor will be a complete factor, and we think that factor preference is going to be different from individual to individual. So what the opposition wants to argue is that make that into an option, because we never know that what factor or what criteria is complete for you or not. And they're simply mischaracterizing of saying that this is not really a good and objective followable criteria. However, we deny that notion. Secondly, we tell you that this criteria is actually a plausible criteria because they are experts, Mr. Speaker. They're actually demeaning these institutions of saying they're actually favorite certain criteria for certain universities. However, the truth is those enterprises, those systems are run by medias or sometimes government entities, and they actually have a careful investigation to make sure that these universities are fairly being judged and sit down. And thirdly, they tell us there will be a gradual change that we made, and without rankings, it will be good. However, they never prove to you how gradual change will actually happen and how it works. Because in the status quo, it is inevitable that there are Ivy Leagues or certain good dominant schools within that district is going to be prevalent anyways, because even without the ranking system, what people are going to do is listen to stick with the past experience and stick with the past reputation that they're going to hold upon. They never prove to you how the gradual change will work and how would that be efficient. We think that comparatively, ranking system is more fair for other universities to actually compete more, because you have the tangible goal, tangible outcome once you actually placed in higher in that ranking. So this competition is more fairer, Mr. Speaker. So thirdly, they say index is very limited, and our question is how can we not just simply enlarge the index if that's a problem? If limitation of index is the problem, our question is why we have to ban it in general, because certainly ranking is a very important individual like me who is willing to work well in the corporation, who wants to actually see how many professors are working, the ratio between professor and student is there, because I have my choice to be informed in that certain category. And fourth of all, they tell you the impact of university. The Harvard University, once they don't have number one title, they will suddenly become a unique university. However, no mechanism, but only assertion coming from OG. And also we want to tell you is that they really deny the notion that the competition is going to be incentive for these other ranked universities to actually climb up. Because at the end, the reason why we get scores, even though we don't really face the reality that even though my math score is 70, I don't really face that, no, that's not my math score. But what we actually acknowledge is that we are actually comparatively seeing which location am I, which status am I. And this kind of information allow us to better improve and better compete and provides a motivation to climb up the ladder. And we think that this ranking itself is unique within that category, and we don't think that it's any different from tuition or other factors that individuals may put into a calculus. So my unique extension is going to be about ranking systems guarantees more informed choice of the students. Informed choice is very important when it comes to individuals deciding which university that they want to study in, because it does not only, influence to their academics, but also with afterlife of their graduation, especially when we are talking about Asian countries. Firstly, my analogy is going to be individuals have limitation of investigating such, because we are talking about these ranking systems are not simply providing random rankings, but they investigate and scrutiny carefully according to what kind of a budget that they're allocating. They're looking at very statistics, and they're very looking at the information that is really hard for the individuals to access to begin with, because the number of the budget that's collected, those kind of information is really hard for the individuals who can only Googles. Those kind of accessibility of the information is very limited. However, as a professional entities such as ranking system itself, they have the full accessibility compared to the individuals, which leads to filling in the gap that individuals really can't do it in the status quo. So secondly, why is this important? I'm going to tell you how this increases the predictability, how the ranking itself increases the predictability of the outcome. It is very important. The reason why ranking is important, because you can actually see how the
Alright. If one university has diversity and one has the best paying jobs, between the two of them, given that they're both the same amount, which one do you think is going to rank first? And also, if you have an average university rising in ranks, what kind of metrics do you think that university is going to focus on in order to rise in ranks?
This is the reason why OG is really not really into this debate, because the ranking is going to be different according to what index that we are talking about, according to what kind of a title, what kind of a topic that we are placing in. It's not just Harvard is only one in the whole matter. It differs in the medical school industry or law school, or professor to student ratio, or the scholars, number of the scholars or number of the paper. It really differs according to the index, and that would have answered your POI. So going back, the ranking increases the predictability of the outcome, because certain ranking indicates the better information of that particular index, such as globalization that my PM has mentioned, and this indicates the plausibility of the outcome that actually can be guaranteed, because the expect outcome is really comparatively predictable in our model. We think that it guarantees a more informed choice of the student. That's the reason why opposition is extremely proud to oppose.
Thank you. To begin the closing half of the debate, I'd like to invite the member of government. Here.
I'd like to clarify first what we mean by the systems that ranks university, because nobody really have told you what kind of standards we're talking about. We're talking about the standards, for example, by admission policies created by the university, second, by the popularity of students admitting into the university, and the prestige coming from the numbers of research published from this university and the number of successful graduates, for example, who become CEO and something. These are the kind of things that becomes the standard when you're valuing which universities get the best rank, right? These are the standards we're talking about. Now, the goal of these ranks to be made in the first place is actually to provide information on the best options. But there are problems between this information, ladies and gentlemen. There are stigma currently that these are the top universities, these are the universities that will create best job for you, and these are the universities with better academics environment. But the problem is it created certain impacts to individuals who enroll in that community, to society, and even to those universities themselves. Now, here is what differs us with the opening, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to talk about how it creates intellectual superiority and how it will harm communities in the end of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, before that, few rebuttals. Opening opposition have stated about how this will help students create get objective information, because the information have been given by experts, and it will help them create informed choices. But ladies and gentlemen, we see that students have the tendency to have actually authority bias when they just when you're a fresh graduate from high school, you tend to just listen to authority. For example, your superior friends, your parents, the authority who's coming from these institutions who create the rankings without actually considering your own potential and your own interests, ladies and gentlemen. We see that directed choices in this kind of situation can actually create harm when you can't fulfill your maximum potential that can actually, in the end of the day, contribute to the society. If you don't enjoy your studies just because you're following rankings, you might not be able to contribute that much, right? Secondly, they believe that it will create more competition and this will be good. We say no, ladies and gentlemen, because you are only following the popular index. You're ignoring the ones that are unpopular. In the end of the day, this will lead to intellectual superiority. What do I mean by intellectual superiority? Here goes to our argument. See, what happens in a university and what differs it with high school or other types of basic education is that in university, you are there to actually pursue specialization of knowledge because it's a higher specified system of knowledge to produce research that will benefit community in the end of the day because community have certain needs and you're expected to fulfill that needs by studying in the university, right, ladies and gentlemen? Now, the problem is right now, what we were expecting to get from university is research, right? We're talking about research priority because fundings are limited, ladies and gentlemen. Research priority are centralized to the best universities, which are presumed the best, with the best students, right? We say that this is a problematic. Secondly, it is centralized to universities focusing on certain programs or subjects which are currently popular. For example, you see that Oxford is famous for its business and law major. You see that Curtin University in Australia is famous, for example, in their economics. But there are subjects that gets neglected, no matter how much communities needs it, simply because they are less popular, ladies and gentlemen. Subjects such as progressive studies, for example, racial studies, gender issues, literature, and even occult studies that might be necessary in some rural areas are getting neglected. How can occult studies possibly get number one in the ranking, ladies and gentlemen? Even though certain communities might need them in the end of the day. We say that this is problematic. People will always choose, when they see the rank, the more popular, the more commercialized subjects. Because when you work, for example, in law field, you get more money. You are more prestigious in the eyes of society, and so on and so forth. We say that this is problematic because, in the end of the day, community needs in subjects which are considered minority subjects. For example, gender studies, which might result in academic review of policies that are gender discriminative and create better policies. These kind of needs are neglected. We say that this is creating harm to society. Also, bioethics are now not popular, right? These are harmful. For example, right now we see that there are Ebola outbreaks and these kind of studies are not popular. We say that this is one of the examples which creates harm to society when subjects are neglected, yes.
Yeah, but that still happens anyway under your status quo, because then people will base that based on job demands out there.
Ladies and gentlemen, the problem is under your proposal, it's going to be even worse because rankings matters a lot. Example for these people, right? Because these are fresh graduates, which they do not know what kind of consideration they need to make. Jobs are only one of those considerations, but you're burdening them even more to standards that they get from so-called experts, ladies and gentlemen. These are the problem. When it's about your consideration of your personal choices, I want to work to this job, I want to go to help Ebola patients in Africa, these are personal coming from you. We do not want these options to be directed, to be minimalized to certain areas that might not be your own interest in the end of the day. We do not want to direct choices. We want people to be able to choose a lot of options, as many options as possible to be contributive to society, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, how this harms social mobility. See that university is one of the medias to go to get yourself in upper class in social mobility, because graduates get great jobs and so on and so forth. If you're looking for a headhunter, for example, you will look from popular universities. We said that this is problematic because popular universities get everything. They get all the privileges. They are very expensive simply because they're popular, and they also get support from the government because government will only fund these universities that they think contributes most for society, right? Governments will neglect funding those universities who are not that capable in competing, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because the fund is limited. Government would only invest in what they think is necessary and what they think will give back to government, ladies and gentlemen. This is why competition fails, right? Because it is the evil circle. The government will only fund those who are best, and those who are best gets very expensive. People can't admit in these universities because they are very expensive. Some people have to choose universities that appear to be less incentivizing simply because they do not have enough money to get to these popular universities. We say that this harms the social mobility, and even if they do enter to these universities after so many hard efforts, they get low-paying jobs simply because they are not graduates from Harvard, they're not graduates from Oxford. Because of this reason, we see that having these ranks is very harmful to social mobility, and it also creates intellectual superiority. Because of those reasons, we're proud to propose.
Okay, thanks. Member of please.
As a student, I would expect the best from the university that I go to. I expect to get the best so I can get the best job possible. So we think that it's necessary for you to enter a certain university that will suit your necessity in the future, because universities are designed to make you to get you prepared for the job market that will come later after you graduate. So we think the only way possible for you to do that is when you give the right for individuals to compete in a competitive market or in a competitive circle. And we think that the best way to do that is to provide a channel for them to actually assess which universities are providing the best competitive circles for them to enter. And that's my extension. Before that, several issues from the opening debate, right? First issue from opening government is that about the students' perspective. Basically, the argument is that there's going to create a false security for the top-ranking students, in which they don't feel like they need to do the best out of themselves because they feel safe about the future. We think that that's false, because people can still feel insecure about whether they're going to get a job in the future or not. That's why we provide so many information about jobs being hard to find, right? We think that individuals will necessarily want to exert more effort in order for them to get the best job possible. But even if they do feel secure, right, we don't see any harm in that, right? And we also think that even without ranking, people who actually do good without the necessary ranking will also feel safe under your paradigm. So what about the people who are academically challenged students, right? We think that without ranking, they can still be rejected, like I raised in my POI, right? But moreover, we think that competitiveness is the reason why they want to improve themselves. For example, if they are academically challenged, they are more likely to exert more effort in order for them to be accepted in the universities that they would like to get into. We think that that's a good thing, right? But second issue, what about the measures, the metrics that are subjective and etc., like liberal arts who are unmeasurable? We think metrics are variant and measurable. We think that's the reason why we have different bodies with different metrics. For example, a certain independent body might measure about the curriculums that these universities have, or the jobs, the possibility of students getting jobs in the future, or even the infrastructures that certain universities provide. That's why we have so many rankings in the status quo. But secondly, people don't only look at one ranking information, because there are so many different infrastructures or curriculum that people take into account too. I can't find any example in the international level, but back in Indonesia, people choose BINUS for the IT major, and people choose BINUS International for the business major. We think that in itself is already enough information in which people can assess, not only because one university is in the top 10 universities in the nation, right? Because there are so many considerations for them to take into account too. What about the neglected subjects that CJ tries to bring in this debate? We think that they still provide that, right? That's the reason why we know subjects like marine biology or occulting that you mentioned before. But secondly, it's according to the demand, which is an incentive for the university to generate profit from that. We think that that's okay. For those certain majors, probably the demand doesn't exist, but it doesn't mean that people necessarily want the demand, right? That's the reason why universities don't provide that. But in the end, universities already cater the demand in the academic or job market. But even without ranking system, the situation will be the same, because universities will still provide subjects that are according to the demand, because that's the only way for them to gain revenue. Okay, so third issue, right? What about the unique selling points that OG tries to bring? We think that it's going to be even worse under your model, because right now in the status quo, people measure things that are objective based on the academic performance of certain universities. What's going to happen under your model, it's not only about unique selling points, no matter how good you put it into the words, right? Because it's going to be about how old the university is, or how many people are accepted in that university, or how many popularity points that you gain from that university. We think that that's even more subjective in the end, and not objectively measured about the quality of the things that are measured with the ranking system. Even worse, there are some universities that will advertise themselves according to how much money that they are able to gain in the revenue, on how much money they can put into advertisement, rather than exerting that money into the quality of the system, the education system. We think it's even worse under your model, right? In the status quo, we admit certain universities still advertise according to how much money they have. But not all universities do that. But under your model, all universities' unique selling points will be contingent upon how much money that they can put into advertising, right? But secondly, we think that unique selling point already is scattered in the status quo, because there are a few universities on top. There are only a few universities on top 10. That means that in the middle spectrum of those top 10 universities will tend to be more creative, right? Especially for the top universities, they need to be accountable with the ranking that they are put in, so they can stay in that ranking or even improve from that ranking, right? We think that that's enough of a benefit in the status quo. So what about the right for people to enter a competitive school? Yes.
A violinist in Juilliard wants to make beautiful music. How will her standards of having a creative environment in her college match the standards of an expert thinking that the environment in Juilliard is creative enough for her?
No, for liberal arts, the system for the ranking system will be much different from other types of university, right? So it's not true for you to claim that liberal arts will follow the standards of academic that are so scientific, right? So, right to enter competitive circle. We think education is about achieving better, and they need environment that is conducive for them, that is supported by infrastructure and lecturers and friends that can only be measured with the ranking system in the status quo. Why is it important for people to have this right to enter the competitive circle? First, it's for them to access the education to the fullest extent, in which they are actually paying for what they actually want to get from that particular university. But secondly, because it affects the outcome of after they graduate, right? Because the reason why universities have certain regulations is to habituate the students to enter the job market. We think that by providing the competitive circle in that, we think it's going to create them the kind of habituation for them not only to be able to be competitive or like working hard to fulfill certain demands, or even to gain connections that are more likely to be successful in the top ranking universities. We think that's also the reason why universities exert certain regulations in regards to manner or like clothing regulations, because students will enter the job market in the end. We think that that's better under our model. That's why we oppose this motion.
Thank you, Government Whip, please.
Madam Speaker, we as a society, let's just say, we are basically attracted to shiny things. Take, for example, when you are asked by your parents or your peers that you go into a university, the first question would be, which university? And that would reflect your rank, your social status, for example. Secondly, what major? If you answer some kind of obscure major, for example, English Lit, you would then be asked, how would you work? How would you find work? How would you find your money, and so on and so forth. We think that these very huge obsessions towards material possession is something that has been very central within this debate, and we think that this is something that creates a very huge superiority, not only economic but also intellectually. We think that that is a very huge problem within the academia environment. I think that is something we want to abolish. Now, I'm going to move on towards the questions of this debate. First of all, is the choice made by this individual informed? Now, opposition said that these people made informed choices, that these people consider many ranks and so on and so forth. Now, never have they really explained how does one create a racial or cultural choices. Now, the thing is, to say that that you are only saying something based on positive and negative is wrong. Even the positive and negative is something very constructive. Now, for example, when you talk about making a choice with an academic choice, we think that you always have influence, for example, from your parents, who gives you financial security, meaning that you will need to be able to adhere to their choices, and how then these family think would always depend on how, for example, media portray certain universities, and they say that, and this also comes to the fact that they say that that social perception would then go against, these rankings would go against social perception. Here's the thing, fact is, most of these rankings reinforce the social perception. It puts Oxford within the first rank, it puts older universities as better universities, it puts as quote unquote more productive majors are as better majors, are best as majors that creates more CEOs, that creates more presidents, and so on and so forth. We think that these kinds of rankings does not go against social perception. They very much are in line with this social perception. But before I move on,
okay, for you to work in like Unilever or like top ranking work careers, that also creates a social status that is better than the other people. Why is that different from this university ranking?
Now, why is it different? Now, we think that when we talk about how then you would, for example, Unilever chooses their employees. We think that they would then first of all look at what university they come from, what do they have, what are their grades. We think that all of these quantifications are something that you would have to gloss because you don't really have very much time, right? We think that these kinds of, and this is more reinforced by ranking. We think that this very culture of simplification, which has been stated by Zivana over and over again, is something very problematic towards social mobility and towards intellectual fostering. Now, they talk about objectivity and how then people would then be able to make objective choices, and what would happen to subjectivity. We think that we're okay with subjectivity. We think that that is the very core of a human person. We think that when we talk about, for example, occult studies or for example, social studies, it has been very confirmed within these sciences that there will always be biases, Mr. Speaker, and like it or not, subjectivities will always be there. And even then, and it's more dangerous when you mask subjectivity by notions like objectivity, because then you lose the ability to critically look at these sorts of parameters, and then you would then trust the so-called objective rationality, because you think that, oh, this is objective, these are the ranks, these are the indexes, okay, I'm following it. Now the thing is then, thirdly, which fosters better community, and which fosters create, for example, a better so-called classless society, which is our point within the very first place. Now, we think that when we talk about funding, or when we talk about rankings and what competitions and so forth, and this is how we create certain certain rankings, so which are better and which are less superior. We think that here's the evil circle that happens within that proposal, Mr. Speaker. Now, how do they, for example, evaluate the success of a university? They evaluate those as the within the example of the open opposition by the amount of budget, right, Mr. Speaker. Now, here's the thing. Question would be, how do you then get those budgets in the first place? You get those budgets by being so-called better, by having prior thoughts that you are the more superior, university. And then what happens then? You have bigger budgets from before, and then most likely you will have bigger budget then, and then you have a bigger ranking, and then you have a bigger budget, and the circle goes on and goes on. We think that this is something that would then foster even more universities superiority. Now, does this bleed within the society? Yes, it does, Mr. Speaker. Intellectual condescension exists within academia. For example, women within sciences are still regarded as mostly inferior because scientists are so much attached towards their ideas of objectivity that they fail to see their biases within everyday life, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, it creates it pushes even more studies towards the boundaries. For example, philosophy, for example, literature. These kinds of studies are basically pigletted to people now because they do not feel that it is relevant. Meanwhile, we think that this is still very relevant towards the people's life, and we think that they can still contribute something. So if we want a better academic condition and a better society, side with closing government.
Thank you. To end the debate in opposition with, please. Upward.
The closing opposition will be the team that wins this debate because we're the only team that characterizes to you what kind of metrics are we using in the ranking. First, second, what are these metrics really used to in the kind of university that you're ranking? What kind of competition that it will create? Three, what is the real purpose of university, which is the prepping and the competition that my member has already explained. I will define this debate in two clashes. One, whether or not the ranking is necessary and whether or not it's something bad. We think that the ranking is something very important because the problem coming from the opening government is not that much exclusive. They say that one, the ranking is bad because it doesn't include all spectrums and it neglects spectrums that needs to be evaluated in the first place. No, we don't think so. What kind of spectrums are we using in ranking these universities? You rank these universities based on facilities. You rank it based on lecturers and the quality of lecturers that are in the universities. How big is the dance studio in the university, for example? You rank it based on the tangible objective measures that you can find around the universities, and the university can easily improve, right? Now, they say that it doesn't include all spectrum. That's easy, that just includes all spectrum. But even if it doesn't include all spectrum, it is still okay because there are still many counterbalance ranking institutions that can rank this institution based on their calculation, right? We think that even without rankings, it will be bad because the rankings that are in the society is only based on subjectivity and based on for example, your great-great-grandpa is in Harvard, therefore you have to go to Harvard, kind of thing. That is what happens in the society. Even further, when CG mentioned about authority bias, and it will further be enforced in their status quo, because people now will have no metric on deciding on what universities they want to attend. They only judge it based on which relatives go into what university. That's why they will go into the authority bias even more. Second, OG said that the rankings is not making education becomes the education that they want. We don't exactly understand what kind of education do they want. They say that they want more research. They say they want more musicians who love their music and whatnot. But the thing with this is university is not prepping you to do so. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't need Harvard to create Facebook, right? Other scientists don't need their universities to create their masterpieces. You don't need universities to create your certain kind of contribution to the society. Universities prep you to jobs. Universities prep you to become the individuals that is being demanded by the job market. That's why the debate that is relevant in this room is the debate upon whether or not university can prepare you for the job market. That's why CO becomes relevant, because then we provide to you the competition that is necessary for these individuals to prevail in the job market. The contribution will always be there with or without the universities. If you're already bright from the first place, then you don't need Juilliard to make you a popular dancer. You can dance in your own room and sign with a record company to make your dream a reality, right? You don't need a university to do that. That's why second clash, what does university actually do? University produces quality education to prepare you for the competition that is there in the status quo. Now, what does ranking exclusively provide you in this? Rankings group students based on their capability, based on their effort, and their capability of getting into that university. So when you already get to Harvard or Oxford, for example, you're grouped with the same kind of students who have more or less the same kind of capability as you are. That's where competition happens. Competition even happens before you enter university. When you take the entrance test, for example, you have to study very hard to get into your dream university, and you're competing with thousands of other people who want you to get to this so-called best university, right? The competition already happens there, and that's why it preps you for even a greater competition in the work field. Even inside the university, you also get competition once you get admitted. You are not completely secure. That is why we told you that people will not necessarily feel secure if they already get into a good university, because we cannot guarantee, right? People can still drop out from that university, or even if when they graduate from that university, they still won't get a job at the end of the day. That could still happen. That's why this individual will necessarily be motivated to try as hard as possible, because they see there are many people who are around them that have more or less the same kind of capability as they are. That's why they won't feel secure. That's why they will necessarily exert effort in the future once they graduate, because they don't feel secure. Closing.
Now, the problem with university, and this is the function of science, is not to create people with jobs. It is to further their own science. Why should university be people who becomes money makers?
Okay, so once you get basic education, you can already create your own projects, right? There are already students from high school graduated and already creating their own music, for example. You don't need university to do that. You need university as a guidance to what kind of job you want to have in the future, to what kind of company will accept you in the future. That's why university provide you seminars. That's why university provide you entrepreneur workshop to basically prepare you to look for money in the future, right? The research doesn't have to happen in the university. It can happen outside the university. You can get experts somewhere else, for example, or you can consult your lecturers outside of studies. But what the lecturers necessarily have to instill in you is the ability for you to compete with others, job seekers in the future, to get the kind of job they want, right? We acknowledge that we're not only looking for jobs but also individual achievement. But that is not the focus of university right now. That's why what is very popular in university right now is the seminars on how to get a job, on how to dress, or like mannerisms. That's why they put those programs in their university. Thirdly, they say about problems in allocation money and on how university don't get lower university don't get a chance to excel, right? See the truth. If you have rankings, the government will know necessarily which university they will have to help. Obviously, they would like to help the university who is disadvantaged because they have no budget. Because the university who is already in the top ranking is judged as the university who have the capability to excel themselves even more because they already have the funding and the capability to become the best university, right? But even that is better because then if the students get to that university and they don't get the expectation as what the university promised to them, they can demand for the university to provide the promised services to them. They can demand for the accountability to the university. That's how the university will necessarily be allocating more resources to up their level in the education. We back to oppose.
Okay, thanks everyone for the round. Please.